Hello, everybody. Andy Jacob here with the .com Magazine Entrepreneur Spotlight Series. Settle back in your chair today. I have an internationally known expert on the show. I've been so excited to have Mr. Chester Santos come on the show. He is known, of course, as the International Man of Memory. And how I became associated with Chester is just a few short weeks ago, I went to one of his seminars and I was literally blown away. My wife and I went to the seminar. We didn't really know what to expect. And Chester not only taught us how to think about memory, but also gave us some amazing visualization techniques and some other techniques that actually improved our memory during the seminar. So you're in for a big treat today. Chester is, of course, known throughout the world for his memory skills. He's been on every major television network. He's been picked up by every major newspaper in the world. He travels all over as really a world-renowned memory expert. And he also not only has an application, but an online course that you can use to improve your memory. I'm going to tell you some stories that are absolutely going to blow your mind. But before we get started, Chester, welcome to the .com Magazine Entrepreneur Spotlight Series today.
Thank you so much for having me, Andy. I'm looking forward to talking with you.
Yeah, it's great to have you. I think the best way to get started, to give people a little bit of a background about what you do, is we have a little bit of a reel. We call it a sizzle reel about you and your exploits and some of your incredible memory sort of opportunities that you've not only provided other people, but some of the awards that you've won and some of this incredible worldwide sort of recognition that you receive. So I'm going to have the guys run the reel right now. So let's go.
That works. We just did some mental athletic training with Chester Santos, who has the best memory in the United States.
With ease. Joining us right now is memory expert and winner of the 2008 USA National Memory Championship, Chester Santos.
If you have trouble remembering names, faces, where you maybe put your coffee cup, well, if you do Chester Santos, he can help. He's a 2008 National Memory Champion. He's here to help us.
Certainly knows he does. Chester Santos is the United States Memory Champion. He captured the title this past weekend in New York City. There he is accepting the prize. He's now
more than you can count or see. He's got the names of every congressman and senator seen. Stack a decade waits from Sunday. He'll get it every time the international man.
Who's the 12th District New Jersey Congressman?
Russ Holt.
Okay. Russ Holt.
In the games you play, he's got the corner wrapped up in his steel trap.
10 of hearts.
Three to go.
2 of clubs.
Yes.
Jack of diamonds.
You got it.
And 3 of diamonds.
Unbelievable.
That's incredible. First of all,
Press can get enough of his amazing feats. He got the memory down to every single.
We have Carol, Rick, Pedro, Jack, Andy.
From Belinda to Dubai with dizzying acts every single time. He's got the power to educate, the power to thrill and memorize. All wrapped up in his insatiable mind.
Chester Santos.
He's one of a kind.
He's your man. He's your champion.
Some of his techniques stretch all the way back to the ancient Greeks. But what's amazing is that standing in front of you as a modern human being, I can still feel those techniques reprogramming my brain to remember things better.
So Chester, that's amazing. Before we get started, though, let's pull the lens back to 30,000 feet. Chester, tell us just a little bit about your memory journey, and then we're going to get into it.
So, Andy, I happened to see a segment one night on ABC's 2020. I was just flipping through channels, caught a segment on the United States National Memory Championship, and it sparked my interest because I would often get the comment from people, wow, you have a really good memory. That's impressive. So when I happened to see that segment on TV, I thought maybe I can do well in this national memory competition since people say that I have a really good memory. But when I looked into what the best people in the country were scoring in the various events, memorizing hundreds of names, hundreds of computer-generated random digits, decks of playing cards perfectly, in just minutes. I quickly found out I wasn't on that level in terms of memory. So I started to do research. How can one improve their memory from where it's currently at? I played around with many different techniques, found what seemed to work best for me personally, stuck to training in that subset of techniques until eventually I was able to win the United States National Memory Championship. And since then, I've spent now it's been 16 plus years training people all over the world in how they can learn techniques that will allow them to develop their memory skills and leverage that toward more success.
Yeah, I love it. Let me set the stage for the audience. Kristen and I went to see Chester in one of his lecture series about 2 or 3 weeks ago. It was at Grace Cathedral. We walk in. There's well over 100 people at the seminar. We were so excited because we had heard about Chester. Chester walked up and introduced himself to myself. I introduced myself as Jake, which is my nickname, and I introduced Kristen, my wife. And Chester did that for over 100 people, where we noticed that he went up and said hello to them. 15 minutes, 20 minutes, maybe 10 minutes into the lecture, Chester said to the audience, now what we're going to do is I'm going to go around and I'm going to basically tell you every single person's name in the audience. And he did not miss one name. Of over 100 people after meeting them just briefly for just a couple seconds each. It was absolutely remarkable. And we were blown away. And then we're going to talk a little bit about these words that we learned and how Chester taught us to learn these words through visualization. But before we do, let's talk about it from a business perspective, okay? We have a lot of business people watch the show, and we know that remembering names is so important. I know you talk about that in your lecture series as part of your program online. You teach people about that as well. Let's talk about how important remembering names is and why that's important in the business world, Chester.
Yes, remembering names is incredibly important. It's really going to help you to get more out of business networking. You're not getting the most out of attending various conferences, meetings, if you run into someone that you had previously met and you have no idea what their name is or what they do for a living. When you're able to remember people's names and other things about them, it really builds rapport with that person. One of the first steps in making a new friend is learning to call them by their name. So that really establishes the relationship, can strengthen relationships. So that's one of my most popular topics at conferences around the world, and I can give tips on how to better remember names as we go on in the interview when you're ready for that. I don't want to make this like a lecture, but just let me know when you may be ready to hear some tips.
Yeah, I can't wait for that. We will get into that for sure, but I'm curious what it's like being you. So you travel all around the world, you're at the airport, maybe somebody recognizes you, or you come off the set at CNN or one of the other big agencies or big media companies. Do people always try and give you something to remember, or do you always get tested out in public? How does all that work?
Yeah, it's pretty common. People will try to test me on various things like, I met you a few years ago. Do you remember my name I was from this conference and things like that. It's pretty common. And even more common than that are memory related jokes. People just say, oh, I saw this, but I forgot. They just make weird random memory jokes. So that's very common since I'm known as the International Man of Memory.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And what we learned at the lecture from you, and I want to get into this just a little bit because I think our viewers are going to find it very fascinating, Chester, is with regard to what they call the photographic memory. And I remember growing up and, you'd hear about a person that has a photographic memory and, they've got this thing that happens where they have these images that just is like a photograph or something like that in their mind. And you actually talked about some research about photographic memory and whether it's really true and whether it's not true, and why people can develop their memory using tools like your online course.
Yes, so it just isn't photographic memory doesn't exist, at least how it's been portrayed to us in movies and TV shows, almost like a superpower. So there isn't anyone out there that can actually just take a mental snapshot and perfectly reproduce that snapshot from memory. We tend to throw that term around and apply it to people that just have a really good ability to remember things. They may have a strong visual memory. It just isn't truly photographic. Two studies that I went over quickly in that lecture at Grace Cathedral. One, they'll take someone, test them in various ways. When they're not expecting it, they will give them a grid of numbers, ask them to reproduce a row of numbers from the grid from left to right, record how long it takes them to recall it. Then they ask them at some point to recall a row from the grid diagonally. Now, if this were truly a photographic image that they were pulling up in their mind, since the number of squares going diagonally is the same as going from left to right, you would expect the recall time to be about the same if they were just looking at an image in their mind, but the recall time has always been much greater. So that shows they have some way that they go about remembering the grid of numbers, and it's very powerful and effective, but it is not actually a photographic image. And another quick experiment, they'll give someone, when they're not expecting it, just a random splattering of dots on the page. That splattering of dots forms no picture, it has no meaning whatsoever, and they take it away and say, please reproduce for us the random splattering of dots on the page, and no one has ever been able to do that. So this shows that when someone has an extraordinary memory that we often would call photographic, it just isn't truly a photographic memory.
Yeah, and people can develop their memory. And of course, you've become an expert on sort of people improving their brain power, I'll call it, because that's what I think memory can be a sort of thought of as. And you have these techniques, and we want to get into some of the techniques for the people that are watching the show, of course, Chester. But I want to set the stage again, because after you named all the names at the Grace Cathedral lecture, you had people, you had a whiteboard, and you had people say a number one through 9. And you had random people say numbers, and you got up to 30 numbers. Let's just say it was a 1, 2, 5, 7, 8, 3, 2, 5, 7, 7. And it went on for 30 numbers. And everybody in the audience was, well, what's Chester going to do with 30 numbers that are randomly selected by the audience? And you basically turned away from the whiteboard and you said all the 30 numbers, not only correctly, but then you did them backwards, and everybody's mind was blown. And let's talk about that. You don't technically have a photographic memory, because photographic memories technically don't exist. But at a high level, without getting too much into it, for the people that may want to take your online course, what's that all about? Let's talk about the package of what has to happen for someone to be able to learn the techniques, how to do that.
Yeah, so I just used strategies and techniques that really anyone can learn. So everybody that sees this interview, you are capable of doing extraordinary things with your memory. And when you do develop your memory skills, this is going to give you a huge advantage in the business world, because memory is fundamental to learning and the acquisition of knowledge. So one quick application, training and development. You're not getting the most out of all of your training and development efforts for you and or your employees if people are having trouble retaining and recalling the important information. There are many applications, names, and I can get into others later on, but there are going to be just 3 principles that you need to understand and apply. And one is that visuals are very powerful. An example that I like to cite in my presentations around the world, you may run into someone that you've met maybe even many years ago. A lot of times you remember their face. You remember that you've met them somewhere before, but you can't seem to remember the name. It's a common experience. And this happens because we are good at remembering things that we see. We can remember faces, but the name is something much more abstract. So one tip for names is to turn them into powerful visuals. If I meet someone named Mike, I might picture a microphone. If I meet someone named Alice, I might picture a white rabbit, because that reminds me of Alice in Wonderland. So visuals are very powerful. That's one. Two, from there, try to involve more senses if you can. So if you're seeing a white rabbit for Alice, imagine that the rabbit has a certain kind of smell. It feels really nice. You're feeling the rabbit. Get more senses involved, because then you're activating more areas of your brain and you're building more connections in your mind to the information. And the third principle, while you're doing that, make everything weird, unusual, extraordinary in some way, because there's a psychological aspect to human memory. We tend to remember things with little to no effort that catch us by surprise, that are really weird out there. So when you combine those three principles, visuals, other senses, make it all weird, right away you'll be surprised that it becomes easier to remember really just about anything at all.
Yeah, I love that. That weird thing's really interesting. Of course, again, I'm going to talk about the lecture because there was a moment in the lecture where you said to the large group of people, I'm going to teach you how to memorize 15, I believe it was 15 random words.
Yes.
And not only am I going to teach you how to memorize 15 random words, but I'm going to teach you how to say the words backwards. And my wife and I looked at each other and we kind of touched each other. I was ready to leave. I was so freaked out that I couldn't do it, because I was saying to myself, there's no way that, Chester can teach me how to memorize 15 random words. And by the way, it wasn't over like a 3-hour period. It was literally within like 5 minutes that you were able to teach the entire audience 15 random words. And here I am 3 to 4 weeks later, and I still remember the words. So I'm going to say the words and then I'm going to do it backwards. I hope I get it right, because I kind of feel like I'm one of your students. Then we're going to talk about how you taught that. So the first word was monkey, and then the next word was iron, and the next word was rope, and then we went to kite, and then we went to house, then we went to paper, then we went to shoe, then we went to worm, then we went to letter, then we went to pencil, then we went to river, then we went to rock, then we went to tree, then we went to cheese, then we went to dollar. Okay, those are the words that I remember, a couple, 3 weeks later. It's mind-blowing that you taught this. And now let's go backwards. So of course we start with dollar, then you go cheese, then you go to the tree, then you go to the rock, then you go to the river, then you go to the pencil, then you go to the envelope, then you go to the worm, of course. And then after the worm, I'm thinking about the visualization that you taught me. You go to the shoe, then you go to the paper, then to the house, then to the kite, then to the rope, then to the iron, then to the monkey. I did 15, 16 words front and back. 3 weeks later, I remember it. And for the people watching the show, he taught it in 5 or 10 minutes how to do it. It's remarkable. So let's talk about that visualization and how in your course online you can give people the tools to do what I just did. And believe me, I don't have a great memory sometimes. So I was really blown away, Chester.
That was incredible. Very well done there, Andy. You did get that absolutely perfect, even backwards. So it takes just about 3 minutes. I'll guide your audience through this. We're going to incorporate those 3 principles, visuals, using other senses, making it all weird, so that in just about 3 minutes, people will have those words committed to memory forwards and backwards. And not only that, we can later cover how this is not just applicable to random words. This could be applied to giving speeches and presentations from memory without notes. This can be applied to meeting with clients, potential clients, investors, to better demonstrate your knowledge and expertise, to really help you in various sales situations. There are practical applications to this, not simply random words, but let's learn the strategies using that random word list. So I'd like for everyone at this point to simply visualize what I described to you. You can do this with your eyes opened or closed. I want for you all to visualize a monkey, because that was the first word. So just see this monkey. It's dancing around, making monkey noises, whoop, 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 whatever a monkey would sound like. That you might be smiling and giggling during this. It seems a little weird, but it's going to teach you a very valuable technique. So the monkey is dancing around, making monkey noises. The monkey now picks up a gigantic iron. Just see it dancing around with this giant iron. You can see this like a movie or cartoon playing in your head. The iron starts to fall, but a rope attaches itself to the iron. And I want you to even feel that rope, maybe interact with it, feel sort of rough. You look up the rope and you see that the other end of the rope is attached to a kite. The kite is flying around in the air. Maybe you reach up and try and touch that kite. The kite you see now crashes into the side of a house. I really want you to see it smash into this house. You notice that the house is completely covered in paper. For some weird reason, it's totally covered in paper. Paper is the next word that I had given you there. Now, out of nowhere, a shoe appears and it starts to walk all over the paper. Maybe it's messing it up as it's walking on it. Really see that shoe? The shoe smells pretty badly, so you decide to investigate and see why. And you find in there a smelly worm. There's a worm crawling around inside of that shoe. I want you to visualize that worm as best you can. Just relax, have fun with this. The worm now jumps out of the shoe and into an envelope. Maybe it's going to mail itself or something. I don't know. Envelope was next. See the envelope. Out of nowhere, a pencil appears. It starts to write all over the envelope. Maybe it's addressing it. See that pencil? The pencil now jumps into a river, and there's a huge splash like you would never expect to see. River was next. See it go into the river. The river, you notice, is crashing into a gigantic rock. That rock flies out of the river and it crashes into a tree. Picture that. This tree is growing cheese. You probably haven't seen a tree like that. This one is growing cheese. And out of the cheese comes $1. I really want you to see $1 coming out of the cheese. Now, most people would have that down already, but I'm going to go run through this in about 20, 30 seconds and just replay through this little story you've created. We had the monkey. The monkey, you see it dancing around with an iron. What attached? It was a rope. The other end of the rope was attached to, I want you to see that kite. The kite crashed into, see the house. It was covered in something, what? See the paper. What was walking on it? See that shoe. Something small was crawling inside. See the worm. The worm then jumped into the envelope. What wrote on it? A pencil. The pencil jumped into the river, which was crashing into the rock. That flew into a tree, which was growing. See the cheese. And what came out? I want you to see that $1. So now it should be pretty easy for everybody watching this interview to recall all of the random words by simply going through the story in their mind. And each major object that they encounter in the story will give them the next random word. So this is called the story method. It's just one of many techniques that memory champions like myself use to pull off what at first seemed like, extraordinary feats of memory, but there's nothing different about my brain compared to anyone else's. Really, everyone out there can do amazing things with their memory just using the right approach.
Wow, I love it. And of course, you say that people reach out to you on LinkedIn and they reach out to you through the website years later and they remember the words as well, which is incredible, right?
Months, years later. It's so cool to see that. Really, it makes all of this so worthwhile to see that the even short presentations that I do really have an impact in people's lives. They leverage this toward professional development. They use this to help children do better in school. It cuts study time in half, improves retention. It provides kids with a much more fun and interesting framework to use, and also for employees that need to get more out of training and development courses.
I love it. Of course, there's an old saying that people say, and they say, use it or lose it. And I'm wondering from your perspective about, let's say, brain power or memory power, if you will, are you a believer in use it or lose it? In other words, as you get older, sometimes we hear these stories and it gets national attention that your memory starts maybe slipping a little bit. How important is it to continue to use it so you don't lose it?
Absolutely. The use it or lose it principle does apply to memory. I have no doubt. Two quick examples. Phone numbers. We all used to be able to remember the phone numbers of so many friends, family members. I remember growing up, my parents would give me emergency numbers that they thought were important for me to know in case of an emergency. We all used to be able to do that. But nowadays, you give someone even one phone number and they feel paralyzed in their ability to remember even one number. It's getting so bad. You have people out there that don't even know their own phone number today. It's a really good example, I feel, of the use it or lose it principle. It's scary I think at times when there is something, especially something that would be very useful, beneficial for us to remember, add to our knowledge bank, and we're not able to do that, it's because we're letting that memory muscle in the brain deteriorate. And I do think that a large part of this is, unfortunately, digital dependency. We're too reliant on these electronic devices, whereas we used to use our brain much more for various mental functions. Navigation is another quick example. You have people driving around in a city for many years, but if something's wrong with the app, the GPS app, or something's wrong with the network connection, they have to pull over, restart their phone a bunch of times and hope that the issue resolves itself, or they won't even be able to navigate to what should be pretty well-known landmarks after living in a city for a few years. But it shows, I believe, what happens when you turn off your brain completely and you're just 100% dependent on technology. It can be a little bit dangerous, a little bit scary. So the positive aspect is use your memory as much as you can to keep that memory muscle strong.
I love it. Let's talk about your particular lifestyle as the international man of memory. How often or how many minutes or hours a day do you need to practice your memorization techniques and your process?
Yeah, so for people that are just developing their memory skills, I really recommend that you try to work out that memory muscle for at least 15 to 20 minutes, 3 times per week. And you can do that with something as simple as the story method, along with downloading from the internet random word lists. That would help you. As for my personal life, I just use my memory as much as possible in daily activities. I travel quite a lot. I give speeches all over the world, so far in more than 30 different countries. I memorize all of my flight information, confirmation numbers, seat numbers. It's funny how many times people look at their boarding pass because they can't commit it to memory. Things like that. So whatever I'm doing, I try to use my memory. Also, credit card numbers, all of my credit card numbers I have memorized. So when I buy anything, I rely on memory first. Dialing phone numbers for friends, family members, colleagues that you call pretty often, I would try to commit those to memory. And then when you need to dial their number, first rely on your memory. Only if it's failing you for some reason, you're too tired at that moment, then rely from the auto dial from the address book. But try to use your memory first, because this is a simple way for you to use your memory muscle on a regular basis.
I love it. Now, I'm going to throw a Sidewinder question in, because when we saw you at the cathedral, you had a hat on. And today you have a hat on. And the hat's sort of become known as your thing. I mean, I see it in all the videos and a lot of the presentations. When you're on TV, you wear the hat. Does that hat help you in some way, or is it just sort of your signature look?
So it's really just a branding thing. I had at one point hired a branding team to come up with even a look. That part of that was that hired a stylist to come up with the look for the International Man of Memory. And that stylist recommended wearing these types of fedora hats. And it does work. People right away recognize me at conferences. Oh, you're the memory guy. I recognize you right away from the hat. So I think it does work and is very effective in terms of making me more memorable as far as branding goes.
Yeah, it really does. And for the people watching the show, we always talk about branding and branding your company, branding your personal sort of situation or position online or offline. It's all about branding and communicating a story, and that's very important. Let's get to the names, because we have CEOs, they're watching the show, C-level executives, people that work at companies, they're going to functions, they're walking either through their Zoom day, where they're working at home, or they're going to the office again. And a lot of people need some reminders or some hints or some processes to remember people's names. So let's talk about that and give us a few sort of recommendations or ideas that people can use immediately to start remembering people's names better.
Yes, definitely. So names, so important to build better relationships, get more out of networking. definitely beneficial for salespeople to become better with names. So four steps that anybody can put into practice right away, and then I'll try to link those to the visuals that I talked about earlier. Step number one, from this day forward, whenever you're introduced to someone, try to immediately repeat their name, shake their hand if you can, just simply, nice to meet you, John. It sounds obvious maybe, but a lot of times when we are being introduced to someone, our mind is on the next conference session, what we're going to eat for dinner later. We a lot of times don't pay any attention, or at least not too much attention to the name. That first step forces you to pay attention for at least 1 second. That's the only way you could repeat the name back to the person. So try to do that, get into the habit. Eventually you'll find that you're automatically doing it. Just nice to meet you, John. Step 2, early on in your interaction with the person, ask them a question using their name. So, John, how do you know Chester? Or, John, how long have you been with this organization? Just using the name once early on is enough to prevent it from just going in one ear and out the other ear. Now, I want to clarify, you don't need to use the name over and over to where it might start to seem a little bit weird. Really, once is enough to reinforce it. Step 3, take a few seconds or less to think of a connection between the name and anything at all that you already know. So John, maybe it makes you think of John Lennon, someone famous like that. Or perhaps you have a friend or family member that has the same name. I might think of an Uncle John. So thinking of a connection between the name and literally anything that you already know really helps to make it stick better. And step 4, whenever you leave the meeting, the conference, whatever type of function it might be, try to say goodbye to people actually using their name. I hope to see you again sometime, John. That will go a long way toward helping you to remember more of those names in the long term. So those 4 steps, right away, you're going to see an improvement if you use them, because even by going through that 4-step process, you're automatically going to be paying so much more attention to names. You really can't help but get better at remembering names, and then try to combine those steps with the visuals. So while you're going through the 4 steps that I just went through, try to connect that visual as well. So if you're meeting someone named Mike that has really cool or interesting looking hair, maybe unique looking hair, you might visualize a microphone getting tangled up in his hair so that you see him later at the conference. You just have to ask yourself, what's unique to you about this guy's look? What you personally noticed before the hair is likely what you will notice again. And that image, believe it or not, is going to come right back of the microphone getting tangled up in the hair. So you will remember that his name is Mike. You're building sort of a mental note card or mental cue card.
Yeah, I love it. The mental cue card. It's phenomenal. Now, you have an online course. People can take it. They can practice. You have different types of exercises to help people use it or lose it. And not only are they not losing it, but they're becoming way better at it. Let's talk about the online course. How do people take it? Where do they go? What's that all about?
Yes, so the best place for people to go deeper with their memory training, really develop their memory skills so that memory can become a big advantage in their business, personal lives, help their kids out in school, etc. The best place to go is memoryschool.net. I would visualize right now maybe a giant fishing net to remember that it's memoryschool.net. And I did set up for your audience special code .com, all spelled out. So DOTCOM, and that will waive the enrollment fee for the first 100 people to use code .com. So people can check it out there. There are a wide variety of techniques to improve your memory in general via fun and interactive exercises. Then I get more specific, how to remember names. You'll have an online slideshow that simulates introducing you to people. You learn foreign languages. You'll learn Korean and learn how to apply the techniques to any foreign language. It covers exam training material, many sample presentations, and that's just the core training. There's advanced training. There's ongoing training uploaded periodically as well. So people can check that out if they're interested. Memoryschool.net and use code Photographic.com to be one of the first 100 people to have no enrollment fee. And if people want to get in touch with me on LinkedIn, I'm very active there. You can find me, Chester Santos, on LinkedIn.
Unbelievable, Chester. I know I've kept you way over time. I know you're super busy. You're moving around the world, explaining and teaching this magnificent sort of process, this visualization that you have. Let's talk about it for a little bit. When you wake up in the morning, you have to be saying to yourself, like, Andy Jacob, I mean, he learned 15 words. He learned something that's really going to benefit me in my life. Not the 15 words, but this visualization technique. I mean, I've been trying it on other things as well, and it's a dandy. So what gets you up in the morning? Is it knowing that you're helping people in their lives, or what's the thing that really gets Chester, going?
I'm just so passionate about how this can really enrich people's lives in various ways. So this helps people to continuously add to their knowledge. It could be to get more out of traveling. So I travel a lot, and I try to learn things about that specific country, about the culture, at least some keywords, words and short phrases at a minimum that they speak wherever I'm visiting, so that the whole experience is more enriching. I talked about in that Grace Cathedral presentation on how continuously adding to your knowledge improves your potential for creativity and innovation as well. It improves your overall ability to learn, because learning and memory always comes down to creating a connection in your mind between something new that you're trying to learn and something that you already know. So the more that you know, the easier it becomes to learn new things. It's a message that I'm really passionate about spreading. I'll be doing my next TEDx talk here pretty soon in October in Dubai. People can give talks without notes using this technique. For instance, if I wanted to give a talk about healthcare in the US, I might start my story with a stethoscope that the doctor uses to check your heartbeat. That just represents the topic is healthcare today. First talking point may be high cost of healthcare in the US. Shooting out of the stethoscope might be a bunch of $100 bills. Next talking point, under current healthcare programs, sometimes in order to get certain things covered, you need to find a way to navigate through or cut through a lot of red tape. Maybe wrapping itself around the $100 bills is all of this red tape. So this could even be applied. This simple concept of building a story could help you to be a more effective and persuasive speaker by minimizing the amount of notes you use. You can maintain eye contact. And again, sales situations would be an important application of this as well.
Yeah, I love it. Of course, I'm picturing in my mind the stethoscope, and then the dollars flowing out of the stethoscope, and then the red sort of rope winding around it. And then you can start thinking about what that really means in your presentation. It's really, really interesting. I'm so happy I've had a chance to bring you on the show today to give some insight. But before I let you go, again, pardon me for indulging myself with your time. I want to give back to the entrepreneurs watching the show, because some of them are having a tough time. Some of them are freezing in the frame a little bit. Maybe they don't know where to turn. Maybe they're younger. They haven't been through it. Do you have some motivation or some type of Chester thought process about what people can do to keep on pushing to get through a tough time in business?
Really, perseverance. Just keep going. Try your best to persevere and make small steps. So my story, I'm sure, is different than a lot of other entrepreneurs. But in my case, in trying to leverage this title of US Memory Champion and all of the initial media attention that I got from that, and then trying to leverage that into more media and building an entire brand around it, at first, it was very difficult to get paid high dollar amounts to give speeches at corporate events and conferences. So what I did was I started slowly, step by step. I gave a lot of presentations for free or for only travel expenses. One of my early presentations was for Harvard University, for the Harvard Graduate Council. They only paid my travel expenses, but then I was able to say, okay, I've been a speaker at Harvard University, and I got a testimonial from them. So I did a lot of that early on. Until then, I built up a really great speaker resume, and then was able to start getting paid really high dollar amounts to give presentations. So you might need to start slow and at a lower cost, but go step by step, build up that resume, build up your brand, and then you'll be able to eventually become more and more successful.
Yeah, Chester, that's amazing. For the entrepreneurs watching the show, rewind what Chester just said. He kind of gave you an MBA in marketing from Harvard right there. That's really brilliant what he did. And this memory process, Chester, is kind of fun. I mean, since I took your seminar and now I'm practicing all the time, I'm trying to remember people's names better. I'm always testing myself with my wife. My wife thinks I'm crazy about it. You know, we're having fun with it. And it's just become a remarkable part of our relationship and our journey as well. So I know you're doing such great work, impacting so many people's lives. For the business people, highly recommended. I mean, it's worked for me. It's going to work for you as well. So, Chester, I want to thank you so much for coming on the .com Magazine Entrepreneur Spotlight Series today.
Thank you so much for having me, Andy. I really appreciate it.